Hello and welcome to Udda Ting. This episode will be in English, partly to honor my friend Richard Stanley. Richard Stanley is mostly known as a director of science fiction and horror films. Hardware, Dust Devil and the legendary Marlon Brando project based on H.G. Wells' book The Island of Dr Moreau. The film became one of those legendary unmade masterpieces, and the story of that was made into a brilliant documentary by David Gregory in 2014 called Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley. The first time I met Richard was at a film festival, and I remember this because it was in the parking lot of a seedy hotel, and Richard is usually very courteous and sweet, but this time he was in an unheard of bad mood, and I happened to mention that I was working on a script based on H.P. Lovecraft's The Color Out of Space, and he flipped out and demanded that I explain myself. What I did not know at the time was that he himself was working on getting Color made and was paranoid about any competing adaptations. I assured him that it was not at all a direct adaptation and he did not have to worry. Another thing that caught my attention was Moag, Richard's demon that he carries with him on his travels. It's a doll the size of a Barbie doll, but with Mephistophelian-like face. The doll is the second incarnation of Moag, and the first one was sculpted, I believe, by Richard's mother. This one he made himself. It has a spine made from a dead cat's spine, and along inside of it is a scroll with the incantation for the demon. Speaking of which, Richard told me a story that at a film festival many years ago there was a woman that showed up and started massaging the feet of Moag, massaging the feet of this doll, and she asked Richard if she could take Moag on a date, and she took him to her room where she had a whole shelf full of these female dolls. These Barbie dolls. She later returned Moag to Richard, and he said that he could tell that Moag had had a good time. When I first saw Hardware, I was 13 or 14 years old. It was on VHS, and I want to add that Hardware is terrible on VHS because large portions of the film has intense colored lights, mostly red, and that don't translate too well to the VHS format. It kind of bleeds out all over the screen. Anyway, I was too young to understand a lot of the things in that film, particularly the psychedelic drugs and bad trip experience towards the ending of the film. Richard once told me that part of the idea behind the odd dramatic structure of that film is that if you dropped acid at the beginning of the film, you would be high by the same time in the third act as Shades, the character who gets high in the film, and the robot starts his killing spree in the building. And late into the evening of our first meeting, I recorded our conversation on my crappy cell phone. And of course, the question started with psychedelic drugs.
The habit of trying anything that was going just out of pure curiosity. And certainly bad trips are a fantastic learning curve for horror filmmakers. I mean, the earlier part of my life, I had some phenomenally bad trips, which act as tremendous material for visually for when you could draw it later.
Did you feed your actors psychedelic?
No. I would not do such things. No. And also, shooting is something we have to be extremely responsible on. On the set, I'm never on anything more powerful than tobacco and strong coffee.
I just want to add here that one of Richard's collaborators at that time of Hardware and Dust Devil was the legendary Chris Cunningham. He was just, I think, 18 years old or something like that, or 16 years old. And he had previously been working on Hellraiser with Clive Barker. He would later go on to make the famous Aphex Twin videos, Come to Daddy and Window Licker. And if you see those, you understand that he was a huge promising star in the late 90s. So I was obviously very interested in talking to Richard about him. And there was a story that Richard told me earlier that day about Chris Cunningham and a bunch of other people from the crew during the Dust Devil shoot in South Africa, stoned in a car in the middle of the night in the desert, running into some serious trouble. I asked him to retell that story.
Yeah, it was a place called Spitzkop. It was a big rock formation in the middle of the Namib Desert. It was a full moon. The Bushman rock paintings were most done at the time of the full moon and were made out of blood. So we wanted to go there at this point in time. It was a very strange place, which we'd found during the location scout. there was plainly a genuine sacred site or portal area, whatever you want to put it. So we decided we would drive out there under the full moon to check it out. And it was myself and my assistant Mike J and Chris Cunningham and little John in the back seat of the car. And we basically ended up in a Wolf Creek type situation where it turned out that there was a bunch of locals who were pretty fucked up. I think they were drinking methylated spirits, who were waiting down there for any tourists who were stupid enough to come down at night. And they had a big station wagon which came out of nowhere and started trying to drive our car off the road, and eventually they cut us off, and they all jumped out of the car and tried to basically attack us. We were trying to get into the vehicle, and thankfully we were all sufficiently stoned and the music was sufficiently loud in our car that we didn't take it too seriously. And Mike, who was driving, drove through them and drove around them. It resulted in a sort of high-speed car chase down this switchback dirt road. And I remember Chris in the back seat. My main memory of it is just hearing his voice in the back seat going, "Nightmare." And he's seeing those fucking headlights blazing down on us.
But you were all stoned in the car.
Yeah, a little. So if it had been normal tourists, or if it had been my mother or my sister or someone coming down there, they'd probably have been killed and raped. As we were all four guys, and we bounced back better. But at the same time, the other folk were definitely trying to get us. So there's no doubt that they had malicious intent.
You had a lot of crazy incidents with Chris, together with Chris. Is there other stories?
No, well, Chris is a real artist and believes in what he's doing. I just don't think that he's like myself. He hasn't found it very easy interfacing with Hollywood. I mean, he was never really able to do the Hollywood act enough to be able to get the big movie that he was meant to get. I mean, it's always a shame that Chris didn't do Neuromancer. Yeah, the William Gibson story. He really wanted to do Scanner Darkly, the Philip K. Dick story. Yeah, that was his dream. And
he wanted to do that film.
Yeah, his big dream was Scanner Darkly. He really wanted to do that. And unfortunately, Richard Linklater ended up doing it. Yeah, pretty bland, great book. Yeah, and he didn't care for the movie much. No. But yeah, I remember for years and years and years that was the film that Chris wants to make. Chris turned 16 on hardware.
How did you find him? Did you knew him before, or he showed up at an audition?
He was working already. No, he was working. He'd already been working on many movies. Even at 15, he'd already been working on Hellraiser, on doing the pinhead makeup on the first Hellraiser. Okay. He'd also before that worked on some very terrible movies. He'd worked at Rawhead Rex, and was working out of Image Animation in Pinewood. The Creature Shop at Pinewood Studios. The first I saw of his work was the graffiti in the toilets at Pinewood.
Okay, what was the graffiti?
Well, there was some really insane, beautifully airbrushed, totally demented sort of fist-fucking graffiti with people turning each other inside out and stuff painted on the doors. It was like, wow. Completely obscene, but really beautifully airbrushed and finished graffiti. This was Chris's work. It was the first I saw of it before I met him.
Have you any plans of teaming up together again?
Not unless one of us is able to get a budget.
Yeah, of course.
Our main problem is that none of us have been able to afford. We haven't been able to afford to do anything for years and years. Yeah, everything is on a prayer each time. Yeah, Mother of Toads is made for 20 grand, so we haven't really had the budget to make a proper movie. I mean, for Color Out of Space, I'm looking for just over $1 million, which is more like for me a proper budget.
Then Richard started giving me the pitch for The Color Out of Space, which to this day might be the best pitch I've ever heard, and if I was a producer, I would have immediately given him the money. This was a guy with a vision.
Got a lot of good creative people on board. Because, in the course of it all, Kareem Hussein obviously wants to shoot it, Simon Boswell wants to do the score, Doug Buck wants to edit it and do the post-production, and then we've got also now Pat Tremblay from a film called Hellacious Acres, and a guy called Syl Disjunk.
Okay, never heard about that.
Called Ethereal Chrysalis, which is a real Lovecraftian short that we're I very much want to work on the trip sequence. The Color Out of Space story that we have, I want to, in the last part of the movie, show the world that the color is from, and finally show the Lovecraftian world on the other side, which would be like the end of 2001, but in a Lovecraftian kind of way.
How would you do the color? It says it's all colors but yet none. That would suggest white light, right?
Yeah,
but that's not too interesting.
Yeah, or something on the edge. We'd be able to see it as ultraviolet.
Yeah.
Or infrared. Because it's something which is outside of our spectrum, which we're the same with ultrasound and infrasound.
Yeah.
You can't really hear it, but it's outside our auditory range, and it's outside of our the spectrum of what we can visibly see.
Yeah.
So we see the closest. We see maybe the closest thing. We can see the blurred edge of it, or we can see the ultraviolet edge of the thing, but you can't see the thing itself, which is very, very strange and tricky. As I've come to suspect that there's things which interfere with our reality, which we can't perceive because they're outside of the visible spectrum.
You mean like in From Beyond, for example?
Yeah. But I've really started to believe that some of these things might actually exist, but it's simply on another channel. And we can't fully perceive them when the shit happens to one. The mind gives you the nearest image it can give you in the mental Rolodex. It's not quite what really happened, but you have a vague memory of somebody shining a flashlight in your face, or some people think that they've been abducted by aliens, but it's not actually what happened. It's just the closest version of the events your brain can give you afterwards. But the real thing is impossible to process because it's fourth dimensional and it's beyond our ability to understand. So instead, we get a distorted version of it where we think something is happening, which maybe is not really quite the real thing. It's the tip of the iceberg. So trying to imply this is very, very tricky. But sound is also something very, very important with the color. Because if you can't see it, you want to at least create the sense that on an audio level, the thing is there, like a channel which is playing in your head that you can't quite tune out of. Kind of like the idea that there'd be a rhythm or a pulse, which is quite low from the moment the problem starts, which is going all the way through the film. Slowly everything is starting to move to the pulse, like when the trees and the leaves start moving, they're moving in time to the rhythm of the other world as well, which may be like Lovecraft's drums and flutes, or
that sounds fantastic.
The music of the other gods.
So will this start at the beginning of the film, go all the way through the whole film, building up, or did I misunderstand?
Pretty close to the beginning. At the moment, the current script, we've got like a 15-20 minute section where things are normal at the beginning to show people what.
And then for the next 90 minutes, it's going to build.
Gradually builds up and builds up and builds up.
Wow.
And then finally caves in. Reality finally caves in completely, and we go to the other world and get a glimpse of where the color came from.
Wow.
I also like that everything is mutating to. There's this guy, Rupert Sheldrake, who's a scientist who talks about the morphogenetic field. The idea that there's a holding pattern that to reality. Like reality is maintained by a frequency.
Yeah.
And that tells reality what to do. That for eyeballs to be eyeballs, for hands to look like hands.
Okay.
Everything is like it tells the molecules how to behave. That Sheldrake thinks that it's sort of replaced God with the idea of some kind of signal or frequency or holding pattern, which is kind of the broadcast that reality tunes into. It's all the molecules and every shape is or stays one thing. But I'm thinking that if
this can change and
if our reality starts being invaded by another frequency, by another signal, which is starting to change everything, so that the people, the trees, the air, the colors, the food, everything is starting to morph into something which is closer to the Lovecraftian world.
That is a cool idea. That's a real good idea.
But it's tricky to do. Me and Kareem have spent a lot of time trying to think how to do like moving trees and how to make the grass move and
Who did that?
Me and Kareem have been thinking a lot
Kareem
about
Hussein.
Kareem Hussein,
He's
yeah.
going to do the photography on that film too.
We've long had this desire to do a really bad trip movie.
Years later, Richard told me that Ridley Scott had read the script and was interested in directing color, but ultimately decided not to. It was right after his flop with The Counselor that, for Ridley, a low-budget Cormac McCarthy filmatization, and his company advised him against doing another bleak film with a dark ending. Backtracking to Richard's first feature, the 1990 cyberpunk movie Hardware. How did you come up with the story of Hardware?
Well, Hardware evolved for a long time because I was always very frightened of the future. This comes from when I was a child, 12, 13, watching films like Silent Green and reading science fiction books like Harry Harrison's Make Room, Make Room.
Yeah.
Books about dystopian futures where the Earth's natural resources will run out, where there'll be overpopulation, and where we'll be living in the guts of some fucked up future city. I think probably Blade Runner was the first movie to give us a realistic future city, or some realistic sense of what that world might be like. But from a very early age, I was very frightened of the idea that I was growing up to live in this place. All the sci-fi books I was reading were set in the year 1999 or the year 2000, and I knew that I would be forced to live through these events. So I was very apprehensive and thinking about this world for a long time.
And the 80s was the atomic threat.
Yeah.
Did that have something to do with it?
It sort of floated around, but Hardware, I don't think it even needs a nuclear war.
No.
I think that it's just natural attrition. That the world could just get worse in any number of different ways. You don't really need World War III or the big one, or some kind of after the apocalypse to get there. And the Hardware world is still functioning. Where I always wanted to imagine it would be a world where there'd still be tax, where there'd still be welfare, where there'd still be an elected government, where things haven't completely broken down like Mad Max or The Ultimate Warrior.
No.
But it's just everyone's living a lifestyle which is pretty appalling by contemporary standards. Of course, now we are actually living in a world which is much closer to it. I first of all made a lot of Super 8 movies which were set in this world. And in particular, one long, hour-long Super 8 movie, which was set over Christmas Day in some terrible future city environment.
When did you do this film, the Super 8 film?
Back when I was 15.
Okay.
And this film has no killer war droid in it, but all the other characters are there. Jill is making scrap metal sculpture, Mo has a missing hand, Shades is working for the Industrial Space Program, and the characters are all the same, and the world they're in is very similar.
Wow.
But it's more like, the style of it is more like Pat City, or by John Huston. It's a very depressing movie because we realize that these characters are doomed and that the world they're in is in very, very bad shape. And initially I tried to get a more ambitious science fiction script made, a film called Eclipse. And none of the producers liked it. It was the time of Alien and Terminator, and everyone kept saying the same thing, that if you could put a killer alien or an android into the movie, then we would give you the money. So finally I sat down and I wrote the Hardware script very quick. I thought, okay, I'll give them what they want. I will put a monster in this movie which will destroy the characters, or will keep it in one location, and made a film which was more in the style of what was going on at that period, more in the style of Terminator or Alien.
But what was Eclipse about?
It was the story about Shades, the next door neighbor. Yeah. And was set in space, and it was set on an orbital space platform. I wanted to do it would have been closer to Event Horizon, I guess, because I wanted to be a haunted house in space movie.
The film was a big success. A Hardware sequel would seem obvious from a producer's point of view.
Ever since the day we made Hardware, Miramax controlled the rights to Hardware, and I've never been allowed to do anything more with the movie.
Couldn't you just change the name or something?
The problem is the various producers always lose interest. The moment they say, well, it's called Day of the Droid, or Ground Zero, or a bit different title, and they always want Hardware 2, or the Hardware remake. If you can't give them the title, then they suddenly lose interest, even if it's exactly the same, which is very frustrating.
Well, what about Miramax? Can't you get them to do sort of a sequel?
Well, this thought goes around. maybe in another couple of years. And yeah, because they're so greedy that they would probably like the idea of doing a reboot just to make more money out of the thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been very frustrating trying to get access to it. The sequel script has lain around for about 20 years now. And, it's still a much better script than the first movie. And I put it on the internet because I was tired of no one being able to see it. And I put all the screenplays on the internet. So the original Dr. Moreau screenplay and the hardware sequel screenplay are on the internet.
So you can download them?
Yes, you can download
them
because I got tired of people not knowing what these movies were about.
Oh.
So then it was possible for if people want to read what the Island of Dr Moreau was meant to be, they could download the original screenplay and see what we were doing.
Was it your idea to cast Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer? Did you want these actors to play in that film?
Marlon Brando, yes.
Yeah.
In the very initial conception, no, because Moreau was younger in the very first draft of the script. When I first started thinking about it, I imagined Moreau more like Timothy Leary crossed with there was a. If
you changed that character, if you directed that film, how would you like Brando to act? How would your direction of Brando's character be?
Well, I would have given him some more dialogue. He doesn't have enough to do.
No.
Which is a shame because he's such a great actor.
Yeah.
He hasn't got time to. I'm sorry, he hasn't got any great monologue.
No.
That he hasn't got any one scene where he explains what he's about.
Yeah.
There's a bit in the Wells book where the castaway is completely horrified by everything he's seen on the island. Moreau looks at the castaway and says, "Well, I take it you're an atheist then." Mm-hmm. And we suddenly realize Moreau's got some religious values, which just completely spins my mind every time when he gets to that point in the book where he's freaked out. And Moreau says, "Oh, I guess you're an atheist then." But Moreau's quite a complicated character, and he's obviously trying to make a better world. I was very intrigued by people like, there was a guy called Dr. John Lilly, who did a lot of experimentation on dolphins for the American military.
Okay.
And who's Day of the Dolphin is based on Dr. Lilly's work. And he was obsessed with dolphin communication, cetaceans, animal intelligence, but by working for the American military, he also dissected hundreds of them, stuck electrodes in hundreds of dolphins' brains and things. As Dr. Lilly himself said, what he eventually did for the US government was he was making a death camp for his friends. Although he was fond of animals, he was creating something which was an absolute fucking nightmare. I like the idea.
He was an idealist.
I like the idea that Moreau, as well as an idealist, he's a vegetarian, that he's trying to create a utopian society that is a peaceful man, and he's dreaming of a better version of Earth. He's also soft-hearted in a weird way.
Yes.
In some way, Moreau's island is a utopia. And as in the Wells book, it really only goes to hell when Moreau dies.
Yeah.
The lead character gets it wrong when he first arrives because he thinks that Moreau is oppressing the beast people, and the beast people are humans who have been mutated or been experimented on, but in fact they're new creatures that have been newly created there. And they love their master. The beast people adore Moreau and worship him as their living god. But then he kind of goes to free fall when he's taken away.
I'm curious, how do you, after two low-budget genre films, the latter not a financial success, was thrown into a $75 million epic with Marlon Brando?
But everything in my life is a series of accidents, unfortunately. Yeah. Nothing was really to do with the quality of the material. It was always a coincidence or just fluke. But I was very desperate to finish Dust Devil. I needed to sell the script to make the money to do the post-production on Dust Devil. And Ed Pressman was able to get a copy of the script to Marlon Brando. Initially, when Brando came on board, there was an immediate move to set the movie up with initiative Roman Polanski as the director. I was very, really pissed because it was my project, and I insisted on meeting with Brando. And managed to get a series of meetings with the guy, somehow talked him around to wanted to make the movie of myself. And then when Brando was on board, we were able to get the other cast members on board. And at that point, the lead man, the castaway, was going to be played by Bruce Willis. And James Woods was going to be playing the Dr. Moreau's assistant.
Okay.
And when it was Bruce Willis, James Woods, and Marlon Brando, and then the support cast, obviously Fairuza Balk, Ron film, and Tamara Morrison, a lot of really great fucking people.
Yeah. But it started with you convincing Brando to
do Moreau and
to do Moreau
as the director.
Yeah. So he supported you.
He supported me, yeah, which surprised me.
Wow.
And Brando turned out to be a really good guy.
Yeah. Which
really surprised me too. He wasn't insane, and all the rumors weren't true. And he turned out to be very reasonable, very approachable, and not at all intimidating.
Wow.
I got on well with Brando, which really totally surprised me. I was terrified going into the first meeting. And then when Bruce Willis came on board, suddenly it was a Bruce Willis movie.
Yeah.
And when Bruce Willis was on board, suddenly New Line wanted to do the movie, because then it was a Bruce Willis film. I'm not sure that New Line ever wanted to do the movie because of that script.
I want to point out to the younger listeners that in the year 1995 to 1996, Bruce Willis was probably the biggest star in Hollywood, extremely powerful, and he had made a few for that time being artsy and original films, including Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys.
I don't think they ever wanted to.
But Brando didn't have any opinion of other actors coming into the movie, for instance Bruce Willis. He didn't mind.
No,
okay.
I didn't. And admittedly also it happened because Ed Pressman bribed Brando. Ed Pressman put $1 million in the bank in escrow, which how that happened.
Yeah. Was that before or after he said yes to you?
That was before. And then, we had a series of very strange meetings.
Yeah.
Which led to, for a while the film was set up. The film went wrong when Bruce Willis couldn't do the movie anymore. When he was getting a divorce at that point in time, couldn't go to Australia. We already were building the sets and making the monsters.
Wow.
We already were spending a lot of money on it.
Wow.
And New Line realized they were laying out a lot of money, but suddenly had lost the leading man.
Okay.
And they didn't want to make a $75 million Richard Stanley movie.
No.
It would have been a disaster for them.
Yeah.
So then we had to find a new lead man. And I was sent initially to Tokyo to talk Val Kilmer into coming aboard the movie, because they needed a name to try and justify the outlay. And from that point, the movie started to change, to metamorphose.
Okay, so what happened? Did they bring other writers in to change the script or what happened?
No, I resisted this at first, because I'm stupid, but I resisted. They already had two other writers on board.
Yeah.
After myself, I went to Michael Herr, the writer of Full Metal Jacket and Apocalypse Now, and then some other work was done by Waylon Green, the writer of The Wild Bunch.
I'm a huge fan of Michael Herr and his book Dispatches, as well as his work on Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket and Martin Sheen's narration he wrote for Apocalypse Now. I was curious how the working relationship was, and Richard told me that they usually met in New York and talked about literature and swapped books. He also said that he never really learned anything from Michael because there was nothing to learn. Michael was just this incredible talent that impressed Stanley Kubrick and Francis Coppola and a lot of other people. I also remember a story Richard told me about when he and Michael were in a meeting with the producers, and the producer was very upset with the love scene with the cat lady, and all of a sudden there was a guy committing suicide from above, falling past their window as they're talking, and they look down at the pavement in the street at the dead body, and the producer is just raving on and on and on how tasteless this scene in the script is, while the janitors are mopping up the blood in the street, and Richard and Michael are just looking at each other.
Yeah, that'll never happen to me again. But reading that first draft was nice. He did it very fast as well. He was very well paid for it. And, I realized I was in the presence of greatness with Michael. I mean, he was obviously immeasurably better at, a much better writer than I'll ever be, in awe at what he did.
So we really had such, for me, the greatest writers in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So I had no desire to change anything.
Yeah. But you said you resisted. You said you should have let other writers come in and.
Well, maybe I should have simply quit the project earlier. It might have made more sense if I'd quit the project right at the beginning and said, get Roman Polanski to do it, and got the hell out, because it was obvious with
So Roman Polanski wanted to do the film.
There was a point when Roman Polanski was connected to it.
Wow.
And I think you would have done a better job than John Frankenheimer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe I hung on too long on the project.
So that might have been a good career move for you if Roman Polanski would have done the movie instead.
Yeah, I should maybe have let go of the project earlier.
Yeah.
I should have realized earlier that this was never going to happen.
Yeah. It's too bad, because I wanted to see the film directed by Richard Stanley.
Yeah, me too. But I wanted to see the film, some of the scenes that we had created for it that obviously were never going to get made. But some of the things that happened in that movie were so appalling that the cat lady, the Firuza Balk character, was gradually turning back into an animal.
Okay.
And she was always kind of an animal. When they had a sex scene in the original script, of course, every movie I make always has some sex. This disappears as the Frankenheimer film, but when she takes her clothes off, he realizes that she has 6 breasts, she's furry, she has a tail, she's underneath the clothes, her teeth are pointy, she's got funny ears, and her eyes are funny, but she shaves and depilates on her face and hands, so she looks more human. But when she gets undressed, she's not at all human. And then after Moreau dies and she stops getting her supplements in the diet, she starts to change more and more and starts to lose the power of speech and becomes more and more of a creature.
Wow.
But he goes on. The lead character remains very fond of her, and she remains very protective of him, even though she's turning into a monster. I thought, okay, this worked in the fly. That we should be able to do this, but there was a huge amount of resistance from New Line on the idea of the female lead being a monster, being and the fact that the characters were still sleeping together was something that I guess was too unsettling for them. There was a fair amount of this because about the Val Kilmer character, Montgomery's character was also fucking the piece of people. Yeah. And indeed, in one version of the thing, he had his dick bitten off by the pig lady. Yeah. But he was getting a blowjob at the party at the end, where these people finally eat him. And there's a storyboard, you can see the pig lady with the blood dripping down her mouth, looking kind of happy. Wow.
So there's a storyboard of the beast lady eating Val Kilmer's penis.
Yeah, there's a story. The secret is a storyboard. Said enough, but not shot. Wow,
that would have been something.
And the animals were on drugs as well, because that also happened in the story there too. Was that the animals were out there? The animals were given the drugs.
If you made this picture, can you imagine what a unique movie that would have been? That would have been, I mean, the ultimate cult movie.
Would have been pretty out there.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I mean,
especially done as a $75 million movie. That would have been, I mean, in time, this could have been a masterpiece.
It was pretty insane. I mean, it was pretty insane. Yeah. The first sequence in the movie, in the script and the storyboard, we started with the sequence with initially you see a dog rolling on the grass, and then we see the Bruce Willis character years later, who's leaving the message as he's recorded the story on his dictaphone, and he's cleaning his gun. And I wanted to start the movie with the Bruce Willis character committing suicide. I thought if I could have Bruce Willis stick a gun in his mouth as before the opening credits of the movie, wow, this would let people know that the film was going to misbehave. Yeah, the sequence that I most miss is when at the end of the film there was a section where he had to fight the hyena swine. The hyena swine took over the island, who became the after Moreau dies, and Montgomery tries to run it as a democracy, and that fails, and then it becomes a dictatorship, and the hyena swine makes himself the god king of the island, and it kills the sayer of the law and gets rid of the law of the beasts, and instead replaces the Aleister Crowley maxim, do what you will, as the whole of the law. Starts running the show, but it had to end with the castaway of the hyena swine fighting for who's going to be the king of the beasts. And while he's out fighting the monster, the dogmen who are still loyal to the humans, the dogs and the cats stay loyal to the humans, and the other beasts go back into the forest. But the domesticated animals still hold on longer and are still trying to be nice to the human masters. But the dogs have a harder and harder time getting on with the cat lady. While he's out fighting the hyena swine, they chase her around the house and chase her up the ceiling into the chandelier and pull her down, and they kill her. But because they're civilized, they cook her. When he comes home after killing the hyena swine, they serve him the cat lady who has been cooked. But the dog men are so stupid that they've forgotten they've done it. They were looking for approval, except they've also cooked his girlfriend and served it to him. He's so pissed with them and driven over the edge into insanity that his initial response is he kills 2 or 3 of the dogmen. He starts shooting them. The dogmen are very confused because they don't understand why he's shooting them, because they've forgotten that they've killed the cat lady to begin with.
But was this the script that was greenlighted? Was this the script?
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to me at that time, director David Gregory was making a documentary about the whole Dr. Moreau experience. And it wasn't until, I think, 2 years later I finally got to see it. And I asked David Gregory how it all happened and how he met Richard.
I have sort of something of a history with Richard, which goes back to the premiere of Hardware. I was at the UK premiere of Hardware, which showed at Shock Around the Clock in England, which was an all-night horror festival. So obviously I was aware of Richard and that he was kind of an exciting talent back then. And subsequently, I went off to film school, started Severin Films, releasing cult movies, all that kind of thing. We released Hardware, and I did a documentary about the making of Hardware just as an extra on the Blu-ray. And that's where I really kind of learned what an interesting character Richard was as kind of a protagonist in a documentary, because he's so articulate. He's he definitely has a unique worldview. Obviously he's quite a visionary. So that was kind of like a prototype to Lost Soul, and then we went and produced the anthology film The Theatre Bizarre, which Richard did a segment of called The Mother of Toads. And basically, so when we were in post-production on Theatre Bizarre, I went to visit him in Montsegur. I had remembered when The Island of Dr Moreau had come out. I was in Los Angeles right after film school, and I got the LA Weekly, and I saw the poster in the LA Weekly, and I was excited because I knew that Richard Stanley was working on The Island of Dr Moreau, and I thought this was perfect subject matter for him. And I glanced down to the bottom of the poster, and it said directed by John Frankenheimer, and I thought that's strange. Strange that they would be making 2 versions of The Island of Dr. Moreau at the same time, and then looked closer and it said Richard Stanley was one of the screenwriters on the film. So obviously at that point I realized that something had happened between the announcement that Richard was doing The Island of Dr. Moreau and the version that was released. Obviously that was kind of lambasted critically and commercially was a failure and all that kind of thing. And then just over the years I had heard bits and bobs, rumors, very interesting rumors about the production on this film. Specifically the one about Richard sneaking back onto the set, I guess, after being fired. So anyway, when we were in the post-production on The Theatre Bizarre, I was in Montsegur and I'd had dinner with Richard and Scarlett, and we'd had some wine and we were hanging out. And so I just thought now is the time to ask him what happened on the Island of Dr. Moreau, knowing that it was probably a touchy subject for him. I was even worried about asking him to be part of Theatre Bizarre because I thought he'd given up on narrative film altogether. It's, just because he hadn't made anything since then, I'd assumed that, obviously he doesn't want to. Surely it's not because nobody's hiring him or he can't get a project off the ground, which I subsequently found out pretty much was the case. And anyway, so I asked him about that, and so began sort of several hours of storytelling. And I did actually stop him and say, I really should be filming this. This is something we should be sharing with our fans. Out by our, I mean the Severin Films fans. And so initially I just plonked my camera on his shelf in his house in Montsegur the next day and just started filming him talking about this. No lights or, professional equipment or anything like that. I did have a microphone with me, thankfully. And he just started telling these stories. And it was originally going to be sort of an extended blog post or a series of blog posts. But the more and more interesting it got and the more intricate that it got and the more kind of fascinating these stories were, I just started thinking, this is something that should be its own standalone documentary. I should be asking other people their recollections of this and getting their idea of what happened. I actually thought I would get more resistance than I actually did, because obviously, I've made a lot of documentaries, short and feature, about film productions, and usually just for kind of DVD extras, but occasionally sort of standalone pieces as well. And usually if there's controversy, particularly if it's a studio film and you're dealing with people who are still active in the business, usually people are reluctant to talk about a controversial production in any kind of detail. They might just sort of laugh it off or say you should ask somebody else about that, or I don't want to be a part of it, more frequently. But in this case, I think the experience was so unique for everybody that there was only a handful of people who wouldn't participate. I really wanted to get Mike DeLuca, who was pretty high up at New Line at the time, and he was the guy who kind of championed the project. And I just couldn't even get an answer out of him. I subsequently found out that he was writing a book, and he was also producing, I think, things like Silver Linings Playbook, and was being nominated for Oscars and stuff like that. So I think in that situation, he did not want to be involved with his wild year. And things were pretty wild at New Line at that point. And same goes for Val Kilmer. Obviously, I wanted to give him his chance to kind of respond to all these accusations against kind of what his personality was like on the set. But, try as I might, I went through every possible way I could to get him, through his lawyers, through his agents, through his managers, through the theatre company for his one-man show, all these places, and I couldn't get an answer out of him. So, unfortunately, it looks a bit kind of one-sided against Val Kilmer, but the fact is I did want to give him an opportunity to kind of talk about this. Enough time has passed. His career's taken a very different trajectory than how it was at the time he made The Island of Dr Moreau, so you would have thought he's had some time to kind of contemplate and maybe reflect on that time of his career. But anyway, we never got to do that. With DeLuca, though, once I didn't get him, I was worried I didn't have a documentary because I didn't have anyone high up at New Line, and New Line, of course, were the ones financing this crazy production. And so I just on a whim reached out to Bob Shea, who was the head of New Line, not expecting to get a response. And then within 24 hours, they responded and said, okay, come into the office tomorrow. And so that was really kind of a stroke of luck. And even when we showed up in his office, he wasn't quite sure what we were there for, even though we'd explained it, and was kind of grumpy about the whole thing and only gave us 15 minutes of his time. But as you see in the documentary, those 15 minutes or the quotes that he gave us are some of the most important and best and funniest in the documentary.
I heard Richard at first did not like the documentary and said he was going to get a lawyer involved.
He came to some of the festival screenings, and I think within the first 2 or 3 screenings where he was watching it, and he can probably articulate this better than me, but I think he realized that it was kind of a comedy. And he hadn't really seen it that way when he watched it. That basically he thought it was just incendiary and controversial, whereas actually it's just kind of a comedy of human error. And once he started watching it that way with an audience, and the audience kind of laughing and their jaws on the floor, he actually started to embrace it quite a bit and support it quite a bit, which I thought was nice, because it certainly wasn't my intention to make Richard looked like a fool. Quite the opposite, actually. I mean, for me, the story is about this kind of singular artist going up against the Hollywood machine and not quite realizing how big that machine is and what the intentions of that machine is. And I did also want to kind of show the side of the studio. The studio didn't really care about this little guy and his vision.
It was screened at an insane amount of film festivals all over the world.
Los Angeles, Austin, Mexico, where you and I met, and all over the world it played. And then subsequently, by far the film that I've made that has been seen by the most people. It's one where I actually meet people who are not genre people and they've seen it and generally tend to like it, which is very nice. I actually even had at the LA premiere people from the Brando estate approached me afterwards, which was a bit nerve-wracking because it was almost like I was surrounded when I was walking out of the theater, and they started handing me their cards, and I thought, have I got a lawsuit on my hand or something? But actually quite the opposite. They were very happy with it. They thought that the portrayal of Marlon Brando was fairer than most documentaries that involve Marlon Brando. So you can only imagine, how stories are of Brando on other movie sets. But they were amused because it showed the playful side of Brando, which if you're a producer is a nightmare. But anybody else, just what a wild prankster Marlon Brando is at everybody else's expense.
Here, the interview cuts to a newer conversation 5 years later, done over Facebook's voice chat rather than live with a cell phone, and ironically, the sound quality is much better. So, your autobiography, have you finished writing it?
No, because I've been stuck writing about Dr. Moreau. The publisher insisted there had to be a section on the Island of Dr. Moreau. So I sat down and embarked on writing an account of the Moreau years. It was partially because I took the decision that if I was going to write it, I'd have to write it in a way that was a different form from Lost Soul, the David Gregory movie. So I've been writing it like a Joseph Conrad novel. Haven't been able to complete the thing just because it's reached an unpleasant level of complexity.
How do you mean?
The entire thing is ridiculous in some level. I don't think anything like it's ever happened before in the history of show business. To sit down and try and make a movie like that, and start off as the writer-director, then through a series of reversals of fortune, to end up being a character in the movie, trapped in a fictional world which has somehow overwhelmed your own world, become infinitely more powerful. By the second part, I've got, Moreau is way more powerful than me, but so is the hyena swine, which the fictional creations refuse to remain fictional. Then what happened in real life was that as a result of that, I ended up becoming then a character in David Gregory's documentary. The documentary then ended up winning more fans than the original movie. Now the documentary is causing the movie to get made again, to come back to life. If it then goes full circle and we actually make the movie, I'm not convinced that there's been any other comparable journey from page to screen of another project. A really fucked up 25-year process. It's clearly not over yet. I think it would be nice if the film got made, just from the point of view that it would then be it's just such a strange fucking arc.
Watching David Gregory's documentary, Lost Soul, people commented on you not showing up to meetings with the studio heads. Is that true, and if so, why?
I've always suffered from not having a driver's license. Moreau was, again, one of those situations where geographically it was increasingly spread out. The different bits and pieces got further and further apart. We got further and further away from the production office in Cannes. There was less and less reason to go back into Cannes. My inclination was to stay in the rainforest and to stay with the set and the beast people. And when I did have an assistant driver, which was Kate, my girlfriend, she got bit by a flesh melting spider. Kind of wasn't taken into account fast enough. I don't think that in the opening week of shooting that production really perceived that Kate being bitten by the spider was an issue. But in point of fact, she was bitten by a poisonous spider about 2 days before the film started. And it's also symptomatic of the balance of power between myself and Tim Zinnemann, the line producer. I've spent a lot of time in the book on day one, because there was obviously a mismatch between the way I was seeing things and the way everyone else was seeing things. It's like the first scene we try and shoot on day one is a castaway wakes up in cabin on freighter. As he comes around, notices various disturbing things, all the different boxes and supplies that are going to the island of Dr. Moreau, plus the guy's got like a needle in his arm and some kind of IV feed which is plugged into one of his veins, and he has to extricate the IV needle from his arm and get out of the bunk. And then he's hearing this inhuman voice, which is actually the voice of Maling the Dogman, reading in the background. What turns out to be that he's reading Shakespeare's Tempest. But we hear the voice coming from somewhere on deck and the screams of the other animals. And eventually the castaway manages to get out of the bunk and pushes open the door and stumbles on deck. And then the deck is full of different captive animals in cages, shit and garbage. And he walks between the cages of the terrified captive animals towards the sound of the voice, and then sees that there's a man reading from a book sitting next to the puma cage, and approaches the figure, and the figure turns, and it's a dog man. It's not a human being, and its face is so grotesque that he backs away in fear and almost bumps into Montgomery, the Val Kilmer character. Montgomery then says a couple of reassuring things to try and calm him down, but he then notices that Montgomery's got a hypodermic needle in one hand of a sedative that is trying to inject him, and backs away again in fear. But in the way the scene is constructed, Val Kilmer, Montgomery only literally emerges towards the end of the sequence, and the lead character literally backs away and bumps into him. So my focus of interest is like the freighter and the wild creatures, and then the build up to the reveal on the beast person, on Maling, the dog person, reading Shakespeare. Whereas from Val's point of view, the scene is all fucked up because his character's like arriving late in the scene and has a totally undramatic entrance. Somebody else like bumps into him. The other character is reading Shakespeare, not him. Maling's got like this whole like fucked up John Merrick style Shakespearean monologue, whereas Val's character's got like a few lines like, "Oh hey there buddy, it's okay, don't worry." But Val's character's Dr. Moreau's fucking creepy assistant. And when I'm staging the scene, the scene felt to me like it was about the beast people and the fucking dogman reading from Shakespeare, which baffled Val and the producers because they thought the scene was about Val.
Yeah, but he agreed to this change himself.
Yeah, it's because he wanted to spend 40% fewer shooting days on the movie, so he moved him to the part of the assistant. But then he forgot that he was now a support part, and immediately wanted to be the center of it. So first of all, he couldn't understand why the other character was reading from Shakespeare and not him. Then he thought that having the dogman there, the dogman's makeup was too extreme, too attention grabbing. Then he was concerned by the fact that the character of the freighter captain was played by Bill Hootkins, who was playing the part in a vest, which made Bill's stomach very prominent. Bill's character also had tattoos, and he had a tattoo of fucking Stalin on his chest, which freaked Val out because he thought that he couldn't possibly play the scene with a werewolf and a fat man with Stalin tattooed on his chest. So he increasingly wanted to get rid of all the other elements. Like, can you do the scene, without the freighter captain? Can can we not have the dogman, or like tone down the makeup to make it less attention grabbing, or everything was about making the star look good. Unfortunately, the star was in a support part, so I ran into a problem there. Then naturally, again, even just staging that scene, the producers would be confused as to why I was wasting so much time with these other characters, with the animals in the cages and this dogman character, when clearly and I should be shooting the star.
So what's your approach now as you're writing it down?
A sense of it. I've been trying to write it like a Joseph Conrad novel. It's very destructive. I had him between Conrad. I've been reading Melville. So I mean, it's not in the style of a modern showbiz biography.
Here follows an excerpt, reading from the time on the Island of Dr Moreau from the yet unfinished autobiography by Richard Stanley.
It was my intention that the island should represent every station of the bitter colonial process. The big house itself dated back to the late 19th century when the island had been farmed for rubber and sugarcane. In this fictional chronology, I assumed the site had subsequently been occupied by the Japanese during World War II, and to this effect created a bunker complex and a vast festering aeroplane graveyard deep within the rainforest that would become the home of the beast folk who had been cast out from the compound and forced to fend for themselves. After the US military had driven out the Japanese, the atoll became a radar tracking station before losing its strategic importance somewhere in the 1970s when it was turned over to the private sector. To illustrate this phase of the island's steady descent into hell, I imported vast pyramidal mounds of car tires and rusting toxic waste barrels, a graphic representation of all the benefits Western civilization could bring to this hitherto unspoiled landscape. After being used as a dumping ground for several decades, the site eventually became the property of the corporate giant that served as one of the principal backers of the Human Genome Program, and hence passed into the hands of the good doctor. I lost a good deal of sleep agonizing over the morality of what I was doing, and questioned whether I was taking my method approach to Moreau, and by inference to Kurtz, a bit too far. But that was always inherent within the subject matter, the very nature of the beast. I did all that was within my power to leave as light a footstep as I could, and I knew we'd have to invest as much energy restoring the environment to something approximating its virgin state when we were done. On the whole, I felt stronger and a good deal more at home than I'd been in Angel City. Closer to my roots, perhaps. The sights and sounds of the forest reassured me. The way the sun shafting through the primordial mist turned everything to bronze and beaten gold. The deep, rich smell of the leaves and the loam, the play of the lightning across the treetops, the patter of the rain against the petals of orchids that seemed to exist outside of any known taxonomy, the constant chatter and hum of invisible life, the cries of the kingfisher and the trilling of the tree frogs, melding into a great symphony of tremendous music that I was somehow arrogant enough to feel myself part of. Even my suit made more sense here. The tropical white showing off the bugs and the leeches that fell from the overhanging branches as I plunged on one merry mission or another through that emerald vortex, exploring the metes and bounds of Moreau's domain, meticulously planning and preparing for what was coming next. Seated in a hammock at the close of day on the veranda of the big house, puffing on a well-oiled roll-up, I watched the fruit bats rising in dizzy funnels from their forest lairs. I remember realizing to my surprise that I felt almost happy in a Richard kind of way. Well, this is more like it. Kate clambered from the jeep that had brought her from the landing strip. I hadn't seen her in close to a year, but when she'd gotten wind of what I was up to, she couldn't stay away. She looked kind of hot in those safari shorts, and for once seemed almost pleased to see me. "You're really going for it at last." I shrugged, dusting myself off. It's just an illusion, like everything else. I watched as she mounted the front steps, admiring the terrifying wooden idols we'd shipped in from Papua to guard the veranda and throw a little fear into the beast folk. "Step in my office. I'll give you the grand tour if you like." I pushed open the screen door leading to Moreau's study, where a slow-turning fan stirred the midday air and kept things a little fresher. Kate's eyes went first to the grand piano, then the books that cramped the shelves. Some were mock-ups, but a few were real, vintage treatises, and there was a rare edition of Milton's Paradise Lost with plates by Gustave Doré that I had in mind for a scene where Meling, the learned dogman, struggles to comprehend human art and metaphysics. A second door on the far side of the room opened into an inner court filled with flowering orchids, where a couple of members of the art department were still at work, setting up a fountain bearing a faux marble statue of the great god Pan. It's very you, murmured Kate, taking it in. "You think so, huh?" I shrugged again, a little perturbed at how the gap had narrowed between myself and my subject. "I suppose it's not every day you get to build your dream home." Kate looked past me, hearing the drone of a didgeridoo and the slow beat of a drum coming from outside. I had to pause as she caught sight of the Aboriginal folk going through their exercises in the front lawn. "Who are those people?" "The Kukuyalanji." I smiled. "This is their land. We're on tribal ground. The Aussies, at least the white ones, didn't want to deal with them. They kept telling me they'd steal, or turn up late for work, or they couldn't be trusted. Classic racist colonial crap. I insisted we'd hire on as many of them as we could. Yeah, but what are they doing out there? Kate's eyes narrowed. Is that some sort of religious practice? They're behaving like animals? My smile broadened. That's the whole idea. It's a process, a system. We worked out the animal behaviorist. We're hoping to have about 300 of them ready for day one. Kate watched in horrified fascination as the semi-naked figures scurried on all fours across the sunlit grass. God, but they're fast. Where did you see them in full makeup? I closed the gap between us, cautiously putting one arm around her as we gazed out over Moreau's domain. I could tell Kate was a little fazed by the sheer scale of what had been conjured from the forest, but its enormity clearly impressed her, enough that she might have imagined for a moment that I was actually worthy of her fickle middle-class affections. Come on. I gently took her hand. I'll show you the crematorium with the toxic waste dump. The what? The waste dump, you'll see. It's a doozy. So yeah, the scenes from the Moreau years.
To backtrack what happened at the beginning of this podcast, the early conversation I made with Richard with my cell phone many years ago at a film festival was that the day after that late night talk, Richard saw my film Inviting the Demon, liked it very much, and at which point we became closer friends. And I pitched him the idea for an ambitious Lovecraftian feature called The Crawling Chaos, about a little beetle being placed like a tick on the human vocal cords to inject a venom that enables you to talk to the other world, to the old ones basically. Richard liked the idea, and I visited him 2 times in his home in Montsegur in the French Pyrenees. The first visit was the most intense and interesting. I documented the creative process with 12 hours of film, a few hours of audio, and a written diary. This was meant for private work, helping me get back into what had been discussed previously during our work sessions. Some of the dialogue are too private to put in a podcast like this, but maybe I'll do a creative process of writing a Lovecraftian script with Richard Stanley for another episode of Udda Ting. Who knows? And with those words, we say goodbye. Thank you for listening, and next time it will be in Swedish. Bye bye.